Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of MasterMind Minutes. My name's Gary Occhigrosso. I am the founder and managing partner of Franchise Growth Solutions. You can learn all about us by hitting our website. Just Google Franchise Growth Solutions. You'll see it right back here on this big poster. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, MasterMind Minutes is really simple. It's a webcast podcast designed to give you some information in a matter of minutes, not hours. Typically, we have one guest. We ask one question on one topic, and we get one expert answer. And while we realize that might be a tease, at the end of the program, not only will we ask our guests to give contact information, but when we post this up on LinkedIn, up on our website, up on Franchise Moneymaker, and on the various podcasts, we will include all of our guests' contact information. So don't feel that you can't pick up the phone or send an email to our guest and get more information on the topic. Today, our guest is Evan Goldman. He is a partner at A.Y. Strauss and serves as chair of the Franchise and Hospitality Practice Group and co-chair of the Litigation Practice Group. Evan is a leading expert on franchises, working closely with both franchisor and franchise clients to draft, negotiate, and register disclosure documents. That's our beloved FDD, as we always refer to it. Also franchise agreements and related key documents. Evan represents both franchisors and franchisee clients in dispute categories such as terminations, breach of contract, trademark disputes, fraud claims, employment matters, and enforcement of non-competes. And that's like there's a whole umbrella of services there underneath that franchising section. So good morning, Evan. Thank you for being with us today. Before we get into our question, tell us a little bit about yourself, because that was a brief intro, and a little bit more about your practice and what's been going on.
Morning, Gary, and thanks for having me on. I look forward to this. So, like you said, I'm a partner at A.Y. Strauss, where I head the franchise group, and I'm also involved in the litigation group. To take a giant step back, I started my career only representing franchisees, only representing them in litigation. So I only saw franchising when it went bad, and I had candidly a very pessimistic view on franchising. Since that time, over the last decade or so, I've changed my practice to represent both franchisors and franchisees and understand better what makes franchising unique and amazing. And today we represent about 120 franchisors throughout the country. We represent at any given time about 60 people in buying or selling franchises. In a given year, I think this year we're up to 67 franchises sold so far. And then we represent our clients in litigation, both inside and outside the franchise world. A.Y. Strauss is a full service law firm. I joined them about 2 years ago, almost exactly, because I saw a really good groundwork, and that'll be sort of a point I'm going to make later on franchising, but the really good groundwork and framework for what could be an excellent full-service franchise law firm. And we've grown it exponentially, and it's been amazing. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. And for the audience, Evan and I believe we met at a franchise expo. It might have been in Chicago. I think we bumped into each other in New York, certainly, because we're both in the New York market. But I think we actually really officially met at Franchise Expo. Maybe it was in Chicago. Back in the day.
That's what's so weird about franchising is it's so national. I've represented people in about 35 states and territories so far, and before COVID, I was on a plane basically twice a month, if not more, and that's gotten taking some used to, but it's been pretty good so far.
Absolutely, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. Pre-COVID, we were traveling a lot, so we would run into people in different cities. I think actually the last franchise event that I attended, maybe the last two, one was the Franchise Expo over at the Meadowlands in New Jersey, and the other was, of course, the IFA convention in Orlando back in January, and then, everything happened. So our question today, and you kind of touched on it, and it's interesting, I didn't realize that about your background, that you were a litigation attorney on the franchisee side.
Exclusively.
And that's, that's one of the things that I think ties into our topic. So our topic really today, or our question today, is what do you see as the biggest challenges? And you can give me 1, 2, 10, whatever you feel. Challenges that startup and emerging brand franchisors, which are typically my clients, face while they're trying to grow their company, and how do you give them direction on those things to avoid the franchisors ultimately meeting a guy like you in court when you used to represent franchisees? So I know there's a lot there, but why don't we start with maybe the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you see as stumbling blocks, challenges for startups and emerging franchisors?
So it's funny you say that, because that is a point I often make in my pitch, which is, listen, I started out suing franchisors exclusively, so I know every trick and every nook and every cranny. And I'm happy to say that none of my franchisor clients, the 120 or whatever it is, have ever been sued by a franchisee. Not one, not once. So with that in mind, I said, I see it as sort of 2 main issues for startup franchisors. One is surround yourself with the right people, right? You need someone like yourself. You need someone like myself. You need a really good accountant. You need a bunch of people around you, and I'll go into each of those categories, so that you're best prepared to succeed. When I give this seminar on building a franchise system from scratch, I call it the proper foundation, building a sustainable franchise model, right? This is like building a house. If your foundation is crooked or your foundation is cracked, the house that you're sleeping in is going to fall on top of you. And that's how I really look at a franchise model. The second thing is have a really good mindset about it, and less about being good, more about being, it's different, right? If you're, own John's Pizzeria or Maria's massage parlor or whatever it is, that's different than being the franchisor of John's Pizza franchise or Maria's massage franchise, whatever it is. And you have to be able to have your mindset be, I'm no longer operating a business, I'm helping people operate businesses. And if you can't overcome that mindset, and you can't understand that, hey, listen, I'm at the 5,000 foot view, I've got to jump to the 20,000 foot view, then you shouldn't be in franchising.
Absolutely. Let me just jump in and tell you that there are a variety of reasons why my company will not accept a client or will drop a client. And I put a whole list up on LinkedIn a week or so ago, but I will tell you the franchisor's mindset, what I call the ability to cross the bridge, the difference of being the pizza maker versus the pizza franchisor is critical, because that level of thinking flows to everything. An example of that might be, sometimes my clients will say, well, we want to continue to open up corporate stores. And I'm not adverse on the surface to company-owned operations. However, when franchisors open corporate stores simply because they want to continue with their own corporate cash flow from operations, then I start to have a problem, because it tells me that they're not firmly in the franchising business, number one. Number two, franchisees think that the franchisor is now competing with them for the best locations and leaving them all the crumbs, so to speak. You have problems with encroachment, where maybe there's a great franchise location and the franchisor goes, oh, I could stick a location not far from my franchisee and make money. And I think encroachment's probably, if not number one, maybe number 2 or 3 reason why franchisors get sued. And then additionally, I think you have to ask yourself, what's more important to the franchisor, their company stores or their franchisees? So crossing the bridge, becoming a franchisor, that mindset that you just pointed out, I think is key. What else do you see as stumbling blocks on the startups and emerging side?
Well, just to jump off that for a second, every year I probably review 30 to 40 competitor FDDs for clients who are buying into whatever various systems. And, I look at that from, the franchisee litigator perspective, but also the franchisor perspective. And then take what I learn and take it to my franchisors and go, hey, we shouldn't do this because I read it in, XYZ franchise FDD, and we shouldn't do that. And one of the things is making sure that who's operating your corporate locations isn't always the same as who's operating your franchise business, right? Your item 2 disclosures, your personnel management authority, et cetera, should not be the same people who's tossing the pizza behind the counter at your pizzeria. Because that shows that you're not invested, setting aside your mindset, you're not physically invested into the growth of your franchisees compared to your franchise corporate location. So something else. So one thing I said before is surround yourself with the right people. There's a lot of people who will say, oh, we can get this done really quick and we can get this done really cheap and we can get this, I always like to think, my mother used to say, haste makes waste. And then she used to say, penny wise, pound foolish. Both of those come to mind with folks who say, we'll get this done for $1,500. You'll have I love this one. You'll have a federal disclosure document. I see that all the time. I'm like, well, that's not really what it's called anyway. So, there's not a lot of franchise lawyers out there. I always use the example, there's 40,000 lawyers in my home state of New Jersey, yours as well, Gary. There's only about 2,500 franchise lawyers nationwide. So as a comparison, it's a very small percentage of the market. Franchise development folks like yourself, accountants, those are really important people of who you need to surround yourself with, because they're going to be the ones who guide you along the way. Respectfully, we probably know more about franchising than someone who's maybe operated a pizzeria for 30 years and has been thinking about it. But they don't understand sort of the methods and the pathway to get you there.
Yep. And again, just to kind of jump in, because there's a couple of points there that I think are important. Number one, starting with the last statement you made, I think that's the myth. There's a certain myth about franchising as to what it is. I've encountered, we'll stay on our pizza concept, I've encountered the pizza person, guy, woman, whatever, who thinks that, well, I'm going to let, Joe Bananas use my name and I'm going to teach him how to make pizza and I'm a franchise, because if I have more than one location, then I'm a franchise. Or I'm going to sell them stuff and I'm going to be the franchise guy. That's a myth. They don't understand the legal ramifications. They don't understand the protections, not only for the franchisor or the franchisees, that lie in the franchise disclosure document and in the process itself. Additionally, and maybe we were separated at birth, because my mother used to say the same thing, had the same expressions. Another thing she would always say is, scared money always loses. And one of the things that I thought about with that, especially when you said about haste makes waste, is that a lot of franchisors are either afraid to spend the money because they don't actually believe that they can be successful franchisors, which is another issue, or they don't have the money. And not having the money, the proper amount of money, in my opinion, remember earlier I said, hey, I listed a bunch of reasons why we don't take on certain clients. We do both franchise development, we do FSO, franchise sales. We're a franchise sales organization additionally. So whatever we create, we have to sell. So we want to make sure it's like the right thing. We also help the franchisor with infrastructure building with, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of contacts that I've made over the last 35 years. Well, I don't want to be embarrassed putting those people in front of a franchisor.
Right.
Already. And we also assist with exit strategy. And in exit strategy, what you do today, when you're ready to exit 10 years from now, the mistakes you've made can cost you millions of dollars in the multiple on the bottom line. So one of the things that I'd love to hear your opinion on is franchisors who are going in this and, they're all entrepreneurial. We're going to bootstrap it. I'm the best guy to sell the franchise. I know all about this. And I'd love to know your feeling on that, because for me, it turns into franchisors selling franchises to anyone who can write the check. And then the franchise company starts to grow and then it just collapses because all the wrong people were there. Because the franchisor was undercapitalized, needed the franchise fee to keep the lights on, so to speak. And we end up with a mess, and we end up facing a guy like you, or formerly like you, in court. So thoughts on capitalization of a franchise company?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. And it always reminds me of a franchisor, which I consider to be one of the worst franchisors. I won't name them. Feel free to contact me offline and I'll talk more about it.
What were they selling, Evan? What was their product?
Home health care.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're not one of the big ones.
Okay.
and they sold 87 franchises in the span of about 3 years. So, a decent chunk of franchises. But to your point, to anyone who would write the check, right? They had absolutely no standards about who they were selling to. And of the 87 people who bought franchises, 86 went out of business. Mm. The one who survived was in sort of the original home market, and it was in healthcare. So the husband was like a pediatric orthopedist, and the wife was a registered nurse or something like that. So they already had the connections in that community. But the franchisor was just selling and selling and selling. And guess what? The franchisor filed for bankruptcy. The franchisor CEO and president filed for bankruptcy individually, both of them. And again, I don't mean to sound like my mother here, but penny wise and pound foolish, right? You're just trying to sell to anyone instead of targeting to people who can actually do this and survive.
Yeah.
But I want to jump back
to, just to, because there's a franchisee nugget there for franchisees. Something we look at if we take on a franchisor that's already in business, because recently there was a hamburger company that claimed they had sold 700 or 800 franchises. They had about 100 open. So as a client kind of probe for us, but more importantly for franchisees or potential franchisees, look at what I refer to as the sold to open ratio. How many has this company sold and how many have opened and how many are successful? So I didn't mean to jump in, but that's kind of a nugget for a franchise buyer, because franchisors, God love them, okay, they're all touting, oh, we have 3 bazillion in development and we've sold 9,000 today and all this, Barnum and Bailey stuff. And the problem is that they don't have the infrastructure or the capital. Well, maybe they have the capital if they sold a lot of franchises, but they don't have the infrastructure necessary to build and support those franchisees and make them successful. So again, didn't mean to kind of interrupt you. I just wanted to put that out because it is a very important point to franchise buyers. Sold, open.
And so that's a great point in the sense that, when you're selling a lot of franchises but not actually opening a lot, that means you're getting a lot of money and not spending a lot of money. And that's a great place to be, sort of, unless you're the franchisee of those unopened licenses, like the burger franchise that you alluded to. But it's funny you mentioned that specifically, because just last night I was speaking to a client on the West Coast who they want to sell. They've sold one franchise and the person wants to become an area developer, but they want to be able to list those franchises in the FDD on item 20. And they're like, well, let's sell them the franchises instead of the area development rights. And I have to say, yeah, that's great. It'll look good in that you've sold 4 more franchises, but then you've got 4 unopened franchises compared to 1 open. The ratio doesn't look great for someone like me who's reviewing your FDD, one of my colleagues, so to speak, reviewing the FDD going, wait, why is 80% of their franchises unopened in this one state? It doesn't look right. But you mentioned exit strategy and making mistakes early on can, like you said, cost you millions. So, hey, I'm going to sell this franchise to John Smith. He's a friend, so I'm not going to, we'll just do a quick agreement. It'll be really easy. You forget to give him the FDD, get the receipt signed. And now in, 5 years, you're looking to sell to, private equity or something like that. And they go, hey, can you send us all the receipts, FDD receipts for all your franchisees? And you go, I don't have one for John Smith. And they go, well, then John Smith has, a claim against you. You're in a whole lot of problem. So that's really important, is to, again, building the proper foundation.
Absolutely.
And then you raised something interesting, Gary, which is, the guy who owns the pizzeria who's like, oh, I'm going to sell it to a friend. He's going to operate it. And it'll be like where, he'll be my first franchisee. I see a lot of the opposite happen too. People who want to be in franchising but don't want to commit to franchising. And they're like, oh, I'm just going to license this opportunity to, Steve over there. And they get into so many problems. The accidental franchise, particularly in a state like New York, you're really just asking for a problem. And if you're not committed to franchising, don't pretend to be in franchising.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I've hung around with enough of you guys for the last 30 years to know that in some states like New York, you can call it a license, but you still are subject or may be subject to disclosure law. So again, I would emphasize to anyone who wants to be a franchisor, but doesn't really want to be a franchisor, kind of wants to skirt around the perimeter, speak with a franchise attorney and keep yourself out of a lot of trouble. One of the things you said earlier, oh, and by the way, just really quick, some shameless self-promotion for me. That multiplier on the foundation, what you do today can impact you, 10 years, 15 years, 5, 30, whatever. Just recently, I read about, I believe it's Inspire Brands is looking to purchase Dunkin'. And the multiple is like some crazy multiple. It's like 30 on the EBITDA line. The difference between an 8 or a 10 time multiple on your earnings versus a 5 or a 4, when your EBITDA line might, let's just say it's only $5 or $10 million. That's a huge difference. And you brought up about like receipts, the acknowledgement receipt on the FDD. Another thing that I have found when I've done, because I was on the M&A side, on the buy side for a while, a lot of franchisors, they don't have their franchisees' leases, copies of their leases. They don't even know when the leases on their franchisee stores are up. So if that franchise agreement and the revenue from that franchise is an asset, shouldn't you know how long what's the lifespan of that asset? Right. And by the way, this is the shameless self-promoting part. On my YouTube channel, I do almost virtually every year at the IFE in New York at the Javits Center, a seminar on franchising and private equity. So I would urge anyone interested in this topic, go to my YouTube channel and take a look at those. And I truly believe that a lot of these mistakes, if we want to call them, are made to get back to something you said earlier about bringing the right people in. And that might be a function of affordability. It might be a function of kind of the stubborn franchisor that thinks he can be the bookkeeper, he can be the person selling franchises, he can be the real estate guy, he can be the construction guy. What kind of advice do you give? Let's say you're interviewing someone, you're evaluating them, you want to take them on as a client, and they kind of have this mindset. How do you gently, maybe not so gently, but how do you gently educate them regarding the right way to do it? And know that, hey, you know what, I might lose this potential client, but at least I've given them good information. How do you gently do that?
So I'm from Staten Island, born and raised, so gently is probably not my forte. But no, I'm just kidding. So, I try to explain to them sort of where it can go really bad and explain to them, listen, I'm just trying to guide you along the right path. You can get someone cheaper than me. You can get someone quicker than me, but you're not going to get someone sort of that's going to be the holistic approach and has the relationships like me. And more importantly, the mindset of a franchisee litigator for 3 consecutive years. Even my competitors in the market, who I have tremendous respect for as franchise lawyers, none of them really started out as franchisee litigators and don't have that mindset. And I see that when I negotiate contracts, for what it's worth, that they don't have that mindset. But, explaining to them where things can go wrong, fear is a great motivator, in my opinion. So, here's what the problem is. And from my perspective, yes, you can find someone cheaper or quicker. But I tell people, and I mean this wholeheartedly, I'm not looking for a quick buck. I'm looking for a 10 or 15-year relationship. And so I will work with you on pricing and timing and costs, because I want to make sure you're growing the right way, as opposed to me taking an extra $5,000 up front and then you're no longer a client. They say lawyers are bad business people. I tend to agree with that sentiment. But I like to sort of flip that switch a little, because I like to think of it as I'm looking for long-term relationships with, quality franchisors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and we kind of take the same approach, because for us, if we're doing the Fran Dev and writing manuals and helping them with websites and all of the startup stuff, and then they don't have the right mindset when we get into the selling strategy, or they're not capitalized properly, ultimately it ends up being a problem. So look, this is a topic that obviously, you see, I can talk about it for hours. It looks like you can talk about it for hours, but that's not
Sure.
what this is about. It's minutes, not hours. And it's called Mastermind Minutes, not Mastermind Hours. So what I'd like to get from you is maybe a closing thought, and then how can people reach you? Is there, for a website or an email address? And again, we'll post all of that in text up on the webcast. But what kind of closing thought can you give us, and then contact information?
Sure. So I think the ultimately successful franchisors are ones that have empathy and see everything from the other side as well. When you're only seeing it as the franchisor and only seeing it, how does this benefit me and me alone, you're not going to build a sustainable franchise system, and you're going to meet like the people like I was 5 years ago or whatever it was. So try to see things from both sides. Try to be fair and reasonable, because that's really ultimately the goal here. To reach me, I will give out my email, which is egoldman, EGOLDMAN, at aystrauss.com, AYSTRAUSS.com. And I'll give out my cell phone because it's the easiest way to reach me, 917-731-4359.
Great. Evan, thank you so much, not only
Thank you, Gary,
today, but thank you for your insights and your good work. And I hope to see you again in person at a show or lunch or something.
Whenever that happens, yeah.
All righty. Have a good one.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye-bye.